Okay, everybody. I think this is the lowest ratio of senators to reporters that we have had in the history of the United States Senate. But thank you all for being here. I hope everyone's doing well and is healthy. And I want to thank Senators Durbin and Stabenow for joining me today. Now, America is still facing an unprecedented public health and economic emergency. Unfortunately, Americans will have to wait longer for more help because Republicans want to hit the pause button. Our Republican colleagues are following President Trump's lead and ignoring the current crisis. The president came to the Republican caucus. They had a giant pep rally and got all fired up to do nothing. What a day. We should all remember, Republicans have a long history of underestimating this crisis and the funds needed. The first proposal from the president was woefully short. He wanted $1.7 billion. We ended up at $8 billion, what Democrats had been calling for. The CARES Act, when rolled out by Leader McConnell, had no money for hospitals, no money for state and local governments, no unemployment insurance. Americans cried out, and the bill contained all of those things that we Democrats had suggested. So Americans need a relief bill that meets the urgent economic need to get things moving, but also meets the health care needs to make sure the virus is wiped out and we're prepared if, God forbid, there's a second surge. That's far from what we're seeing today. We have whimsical, impulsive, erratic behavior from the president, who looks for diversions like hydroxychloroquine all the time. I wonder if they talked about hydroxychloroquine at their lunch. I hope not. But the question is, how much will the Republican pause cost the American economy? The Republican pause is a riverboat gamble where American workers will, in all likelihood, pay the cost of Republican action with their homes, their families, their livelihoods. Economists from all ends of the spectrum are warning that inaction at this critical moment could worsen an economic crisis into another Great Depression. Herbert Hoover loomed over the Republican caucus lunch today. Yet amazingly, Leader McConnell said Republicans still want to pause. What planet are they on? The coronavirus isn't taking a pause. The job losses aren't taking a pause. The people being evicted from their homes aren't taking a pause. They seem to be ignoring all of the economic alarms that are sounding. Without further action, Chairman Powell said, quote, "We risk a prolonged recession and weak recovery, with unemployment reaching 20 or even 25% depression levels." But you wouldn't know we're in the middle of a crisis looking at what the Senate's doing this week. What's at the top of the action items in the Republican-controlled Senate? More nominations, more conspiracy theories. It's a very clear contrast between what the American people are most worried about and what the Senate Republicans are focused on. If Republicans miss this moment, they will have to answer to the American people. Senator Durbin.
Thanks, Chuck. Debbie. Last Tuesday, the day the House unveiled the HEROES Act, Senator Mitch McConnell of Kentucky dismissed it as, quote, "dead on arrival." Really? America's jobless rate has climbed to levels we haven't seen since the Great Depression, and families are lining up at food banks with tears in their eyes for the first time, facing the reality of being out of work and no place to turn. But Senator McConnell says he doesn't see the urgency of Congress acting now. He suggests we can wait maybe until June or July and decide then whether Americans need help. Well, at the end of June, we'll see the end of the Paycheck Protection Program. At the end of July, we'll see the end of the unemployment assistance that the federal government included in the CARES Act. But according to Senator McConnell, we have time. Well, we may have time in the Senate, but do the families of Illinois and New York and Michigan and Kentucky have time? I couldn't disagree with him more. Democrats believe that we need to start right now, immediately, after this bill has passed the House of Representatives, to start our negotiations. Listen, if you followed what we've been doing during the course of this year, you understand that bills start off with certain suggestions included or not included, and then the negotiations and compromise begin, and we end up with, usually, a bipartisan bill, usually. On Friday, the House passed the HEROES Act. It includes desperately needed help for American families and small businesses to help them survive the enormous public health and economic crisis brought on by this pandemic. It provides resources to hospitals, which are hanging on by a thread. Listen, southern Illinois, downstate Illinois, is right next to the Commonwealth of Kentucky. We know what our hospitals are facing, and we know what Mitch McConnell's hospitals are also facing in the state of Kentucky. We need to make sure that we have the help for these hospitals and increase funding for testing, and you're going to remind me of that, aren't you? For testing and contact tracing Without these, we really can't hope to reopen the economy. The HEROES Act also provides emergency assistance to state and local governments to help offset the massive costs of responding to the pandemic. This is the money desperately needed so the communities don't have to begin massive layoffs of police, firefighters, EMTs, doctors, nurses, and teachers. How important is this money to governors? Let me quote one governor. He coincidentally is the governor of the state of Kentucky. And here's what he said 5 days ago. We must have assistance from the federal government with our state and local budgets, he said, Governor Beshear said, adding that all other governors agree with him. Our budget in the state of Kentucky and every local budget will be devastated without direct help from Congress, he said. Now is not the time to be timid. Now is the time to make sure what it takes to get our country on the right track. I think it's pretty clear what we have to do. And to think that we are going to leave at the end of this week without even touching the work of the House and not begin serious negotiations is really heartbreaking. When you consider the families that needed that $1,200 check desperately and need it again, the fact that Senator McConnell is saying it's not urgent doesn't reflect what the families of Illinois and Kentucky feel every single day. When you know these hospitals are hanging on by a thread in rural and downstate areas of Kentucky as well as Illinois, the fact that we're not providing them assistance is inexcusable, and it is urgent that we do so.
Senator Stabenow.
Well, I want to thank Senator Schumer and Senator Durbin for their leadership in this ongoing crisis, as well as in all the challenges that we have faced. The first case of COVID-19 was reported in the United States on January 20th, but President Trump did not take it seriously. He was more worried about the stock market than the people in the supermarket. They slow-walked declaring a national emergency. They failed to quickly implement widespread testing, and they dropped the ball on getting the essential medical equipment and supplies our hospitals need and still need to treat patients. Their reckless delay made us the leader in the world in the number of COVID-19 cases and deaths. Now, 4 months have passed and we're getting closer to 100,000 precious Americans' lives lost. Yet President Trump, Leader McConnell, the Senate Republicans continue to show a total lack of urgency about this crisis. Today, we're releasing a report that details the price of that inaction, the price of not acting to support states and local communities that are providing the frontline services and the quality of life that people need every day. Our report shows that states and local communities are facing critical budget shortfalls. Already in April alone, state and local governments cut nearly 1 million jobs. That was in April. 1 million jobs in April, and they reduced the salaries of thousands of workers. Without urgent federal help, massive cuts are going to be made in services that affect our safety, our children's education, and our way of life. President Trump said states were the front lines in the crisis and he would have their backs. Instead, he has turned his back, and so has Mitch McConnell. Instead of working in a bipartisan way to deliver financial help to American communities, Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell has suggested he would rather states go bankrupt. If Republicans fail to support our state and local governments, they are failing our police officers, our teachers, our firefighters, our doctors and nurses and sanitary workers, and all the really essential people who keep us safe and keep our communities running. The bottom line is this: Mitch McConnell's inaction has consequences. We are losing precious lives, and every part of the economy is affected. Mitch McConnell may not feel a sense of urgency, but on behalf of the American people, we do. And the Senate needs to act now.
Thank you, Senator Stabenow. Okay, questions?
Thank you, sir. So I wanted to start off, so Leader McConnell last week said that the HEROES Act was DOA when it arrived in the Senate. Have you started having conversations with some of your Republican colleagues who maybe don't feel the same way that Leader
Well,
McConnell
we know
feels?
there are a bunch of Republican colleagues who don't feel this way by what they say when they go home and what they say here. But Leader McConnell and President Trump don't see the need to act, and as always, the Republican senators seem to just follow them directly in line. And so we're waiting. Now, let me remind you, in each case, McConnell has said we don't have to act, or we can act in a much smaller way. In each case, the needs of the American public pushed him to do a lot more with us, to join with us, and to work with us to get something done. I predict that will happen. The American people will force Leader McConnell and his Republican colleagues to the table to get a robust bill.
What were some of the things that were passed in the HEROES Act last week that you all see as Senate Democrat priorities?
Well, I'm not going to get into each specific priority, but, when you talk about, as Debbie did in her report today, state and local, that is very, very important. There are so many things in here that are important to working people, for people for housing, for people for food, for jobs, to reform some of the things that were done in small business. These are all important to us.
I also wanted to ask about Interim Chairman, Intel Chairman Rubio. Today they passed former Representative Ratcliffe's DNI nomination out of the committee. What's your comment on that? And did you ask Senate Democrats to not support the Ratcliffe nomination?
No, I told them I was not supporting them, and the entire Intelligence Committee voted no. For the DNI, you need someone who puts intelligence first, not partisanship first. Ratcliffe, throughout his career, has been one of the harshest partisans around. And if you talk to professionals who are neither Democrats nor Republicans in the intelligence agencies, they're very worried that he will further politicize the intelligence agencies, which will hurt America. You know what you need here? You need in Intel more than any other place someone who speaks truth to power. That's what Dan Coats did. Trump didn't want to hear it, and Dan Coats is gone. If you don't speak the truth, just like when you don't speak the truth about COVID, the consequences to America will get far worse. You can't predict how, where, or when, but they will. And I worry that Ratcliffe is too much of a partisan to speak truth to power.
All right, and then on Inspector General Linick, weren't there questions from Democrats back during the Hillary Clinton investigation about how he handled that as well?
Well, I'm not familiar with those specific questions. I would say this. Trump has fired 4 inspectors general in 3 months. Again, this president has an adversity to the truth. And when he hears the truth and it doesn't square with what he wants to hear, instead of adapting to the truth, he fires the truth teller. That's very harmful. It hurt us badly in COVID. It will hurt us in Intel. It will hurt us across the board. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all.